Subcommittee will come to order, although I have to admit you're a pretty orderly crowd. This is very quiet. Everybody's tired out from a long day yesterday, even Mr. Raskin, maybe? That's the quietest I've seen you for a few minutes. We're going to get you fired up. Thank you for being here. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on restoring law and order in high-crime cities. I now will recognize the gentleman from Alabama to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I ask that we remain standing for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Again, I want to welcome everyone here today to another hearing of the Subcommittee on Oversight. Today, we're going to focus on one very simple truth. We need to restore the rule of law in America's high-crime cities. And let's be honest about something from the very start. Crime just didn't rise and come about on its own. It happened because leaders chose so. Leaders in the Democratic-run cities have made political choices. Choices that put radical ideology before safety, politics before people, and criminals before the safety of the good people in our communities. For years, these cities have embraced soft on crime prosecutors, eliminated cash bail, reduced penalties for repeat offenders. They empowered criminals. They undermined law enforcement. They weakened the very fabric that keeps our families safe. And here is the truth, the simple truth. It's not complicated. It is just reality. When you reward criminal behavior, you get more of it. It's that simple. When you take away consequences, you get chaos. When you weaken the rule of law, you hurt the very people that you claim to protect. In Charlotte, a community that this committee, many of us on this committee, we went to Charlotte, and we saw firsthand in a field hearing, they tried to, quote, reimagine criminal justice. Do you know what happened when the reimagining delivered? Repeat offenders walking the streets over and over and over again. Charlotte was quite an experience. Now, we've gone as a full committee to New York City, we've gone to Philadelphia, then this committee actually went to Charlotte. And we saw the work of the left-wing magistrates, of the left-wing judges, of the left-wing attorneys general, of the left-wing prosecutors, the results, the death, the mayhem, and the chaos. It's real. It's not funny. And you know, when we talk to the people in Charlotte, I'll never forget the father of the one young lady. And I believe, and I don't even have this in front of me, I'm digressing for a minute, but this woman was pulled out of her bed, stripped naked, had to get down on her knees, God knows what, and then the perpetrator took a shotgun, put it to her chest, and took her life. The father was there. Man, I wish each and every one of you could have seen that father. He was so upset. He was shaking. He was crying. This was a grown man. Any of us that are parents, any of us that love anybody in our lives, you can't imagine. You can't, I said at the time, I said, I wish I could say to you, I know how you feel. I don't. Nobody here, unless you've lost somebody, and we do have somebody who has, nobody knows how you feel. We don't. But you could see it. The guy who did it, he was the perpetrator, was charged over 40 times and released over and over and over and over. I won't do it 40 sometimes again. It's sick. And people are living with fear instead of freedom. And we remember another case, the murder of Irina Zarutska. That's why we went to Charlotte, a murder that should have never happened, a murder committed by a criminal who obviously had deep-seated problems and was released not 1 or 2 or 3 times, 14 times. 14 times. Irina loved America. She sat down in the train, and he came up behind her. She never met him, never saw him, didn't even look at him, and he violently stabbed her in her neck and murdered her in front of everybody on that train. She loved America. Her family actually had her. She loved America so much, her family, she was Ukrainian, had her buried in America because she had such hopes and such desires and such ambitions. The city of Memphis continues to lead the nation in violent crime, and not in spite of policy decisions, but because of them. The district attorney in Shelby County, backed by George Soros, fact, you may not like it, but it's true, turned cash bail into a last resort. And when you make accountability a last resort, you make public danger the first result. Again and again, criminals are released. Again and again, they commit crimes. Again and again, innocent people pay the price over and over. It isn't justice, ladies and gentlemen. It's not compassion. It's the literal definition of insanity. It's failure. It's cruel. It's unfair to law-abiding citizens, plain and simple. Los Angeles, another town. We can name any of them. Almost every city in America, almost. Career criminals, rapists, cop killers are given leniency through special directives that prioritize ideology over good public safety. The result is predictable. Gangs have been emboldened, communities have been terrorized, and a once great American city has been hollowed out again by lawlessness. The city of Chicago, everybody knows about Chicago, still the murder capital of America, still drowning in violence, and still doubling down on the same bad ideas like eliminating cash bail and making pre-trial release the default. Just last week, a Chicago man known for serially punching women, just walks right up to them, and it's women always, walks right up to her, big guy too, by the way, big guy, and just punches her in the face. So I don't have any words. He was arrested and released for the 20th time. God help you if you're a woman and you're walking down that street. And maybe after he's done, you're not even recognizable anymore. It's nice for you, isn't it? Nice for your family because of the policies we have. If he wasn't released, it wouldn't happen. 20 times back on the streets. In what world are these politicians living in when they design laws that make it easier for someone like that to be released over and over instead of designing laws that protect the women that are continually assaulted? These are dangerous policies, they're bad policies, and they have a predictable outcome. They hamper law enforcement, and they let dangerous people walk our streets. It's that simple. It really isn't that complicated. In fact, I've spoken with law enforcement, true story, not only in Charlotte, but in other areas where we've gone on the road, this committee, who've told me that oftentimes before they're even done writing up the arrest report and somebody has looked at it, before that even happens, they're watching the person being released. They're not even done with the report, and they're already out. It's an upside-down world. It's a bizarro world. It's a sick world that we live in, and it has to stop. For 4 long years, the past administration, the Biden-Harris administration, encouraged this mentality, encouraged soft-on-crime policies, encouraged the unraveling of law and order in what was our beautiful, sparkling cities. That changed earlier this year. And I know not everybody's going to agree with me on this, but it did. Since President Trump was sworn back in office, he has done what he always said he would do. There was no surprise here. Restore common sense, restore law and order, restore accountability. And in August, President Trump deployed the National Guard and federal agents to support local police right here in Washington, D.C. And people tell me, oh, they exaggerate in Washington, nothing happens. Well, I just think of the people that I know. I think of the gentleman from Kansas whose intern was murdered in Washington, D.C. How does his family feel? This young intern comes to D.C. to learn, and he never leaves because he's killed, he's murdered. Or in my office alone, where we've had, just in my office, numerous people that have been attacked. on the streets in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And the stories go on and on. We have other members that were carjacked. I can go through the list. I'm not going to do it. It's wrong. And you know what? It's not funny when it happens to you. It's really serious. In August, President Trump deployed all these folks, and what happens when you enforce the law? Crimes went down, safety went up, over 4,000 arrests, and an 11% drop in crime citywide, 11% drop in just a few months. Words don't do that. Ideology doesn't do that. Press conferences don't do that. Action does that. Real action, tough action, necessary action. And because it worked, because results speak louder than slogans, other cities, many of them, are asking for the same help. In September, National Guard units were deployed to Memphis and Portland. Plans are underway for Chicago as well. And of course, in many of these cities, Democrat officials are fighting it every step of the way, fighting safety, fighting accountability, fighting success. And in some areas where there are deployed people who live in the neighborhoods, who live in the areas, we had some folks, even in D.C., said it was the first time in years that they had walked up and down their streets in safety. In years. They were so happy. We are here today because the American people do deserve better. They deserve leaders who are going to protect them and take care of them. They deserve prosecutors who enforce the law. They deserve cities where criminals fear consequences and families feel safe. To our witnesses, I want to thank you for being here. I know it's your precious time. I thank you for speaking on behalf of communities living through the nightmare of bad policy and failed leadership. I even thank the folks that are going to disagree with me. We look forward to your testimony. Thank you. I now will recognize the ranking member, Ms. Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for calling this hearing. Since January, Donald Trump has used the full power of the federal government to attack Americans in cities across the country. In Donald Trump's America, you are at increased risk of experiencing militaristic operations in your home, increased risk of being subject to detainment by mass thugs and wannabe vigilantes, increased risk of suffering injuries due to reckless and illegal acts by rogue federal agents, increased risk of being deported to foreign nations even if you are an American citizen, and you're at an increased risk of being targeted by federal government for criticizing the president and his friends. Congressional Republicans have completely abandoned their Article I powers and have exchanged their responsibility to their constituents with fealty to the president. They have allowed the president to morph federal agencies into instruments of autocracy. And as a result, the president has been able to ignore federal law, disregard court orders, and implement the largest pay-for-play scheme in American history. The White House, well, what's left of it anyway, is literally up for sale. The federal courts have characterized this presidency as, quote, lawless. In fact, when ruling against illegal acts committed by the administration, a Republican-appointed federal judge stated, quote, the court cannot imagine how the public interest might be served by permitting federal officials to flaunt the very laws they have sworn to enforce. In a separate case where the administration was sued for unlawful acts, the judge, also a Republican appointee, stated, quote, allowing constitutional rights to be dependent upon the grace of the executive branch would be a dereliction of duty by this third and independent branch of government and would be against the public interest. But in another case, the court summed it up perfectly by declaring, quote, as is becoming far too common, we are confronted again with the efforts of the executive branch to set aside the rule of law in pursuit of its own goals. Judiciary Committee Republicans have been completely complicit in this corruption. But since they're so interested in restoring law and order, I have a couple of suggestions on where they can start. Number one, this is the President of the United States standing beside his best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. As we all know, Mr. Epstein is one of the most notorious sexual predators in American history. For 8 weeks, the Republicans on this committee have chosen to protect these two men instead of providing justice to Mr. Epstein's victims. Now the administration is panicking. First, they campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. Then AG Bondi and Associates did a photo op with the files. And she said, and I quote, "The Epstein list is on my desk." Then somehow the Epstein list didn't exist. Then the Epstein files became a Democratic hoax. Now the president is supposedly supportive of releasing the files, even though he's currently ignoring a congressional subpoena to do so. Now the president is simply crashing out. And it's because he can't seem to explain his special decades-long relationship with one of the most prominent sexual predators in American history. It's already public that he's in the Epstein files, but his administration is hiding the context of his involvement, if any, with Mr. Epstein's horrific crimes. Now, this is Miss Ghislaine Maxwell. Miss Maxwell, who obviously helped Jeffrey Epstein traffic more than 1,000 women and girls, well, Donald Trump is now giving her special treatment while she's serving out her prison sentence. He won't even rule out giving her a pardon or commuting her sentence. I don't need to explain why pardoning sex traffickers wouldn't be restoring law and order. Now, this is Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem. Not only has Secretary Noem been busy filming propaganda ads, she's also been busy cashing in on millions of taxpayer dollars. In fact, Secretary Noem has funneled millions of dollars to a company called the Strategy Group. The Strategy Group helped Secretary Noem win her campaign to become the governor of South Dakota. Corey Lewandowski, her top policy advisor, has worked with the firm. And the company's CEO is married to Secretary Noem's chief spokesperson, Mrs. Tricia McLaughlin. This is what corruption looks like. They're stealing money from the American people's pockets and depositing it into their bank accounts. Now we move on to yet somebody else. This is the so-called border czar, Tom Homan. Mr. Homan is on tape accepting $50,000 in cash bribes stuffed in a brown paper bag from an undercover FBI agent. Apparently, Mr. Homan accepted these bribes in exchange for awarding federal contracts to his friends. Trump's Department of Justice killed the investigation into Mr. Homan's crimes, and congressional Republicans didn't say a mumbling word. Lastly, this is insurrectionist and Nazi sympathizer Ed Martin. It appears that Mr. Martin is functioning as the Associate Deputy Attorney General, Pardon Attorney, Director of the Fake Weaponization Working Group, and Special Attorney for Mortgage Fraud. All that means is that Mr. Martin is Trump's lapdog, whom the president sends to initiate lawsuits against the president's perceived political opponents. This is what we call organized crime. They're breaking the law, often by stealing taxpayer dollars, covering up their crimes by ending and obstructing investigations, then prosecuting people who call out their unlawful behavior. And while the Republicans are encouraging this corruption, they're abandoning actual victims of violent crime and ignoring the Republican-led state's 21st century murder crisis. In September's appropriation markup, congressional Republicans proposed reducing the FBI staff by thousands of positions and underfunding the agency by more than $1 billion. They've proposed slashing resources from the ATF. They've proposed cutting grants for juvenile justice programs and hate crimes and eliminating the community violence intervention and prevention grants. They're literally defunding the police. So no matter what they say at today's hearing, congressional Republicans have proven that they are not investing in keeping American communities safe from violent crime. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. We're fortunate to have with us the chairman of the Committee of the Whole today, Mr. Jordan, and the ranking member, Mr. Raskin. I believe Mr. Jordan's not going to do an opening at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this important hearing. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I'll take mine now. I'm going to try to stay for as much of the hearing as I can, but I won't be able to do it at the end. So.
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I wanted to just begin by underscoring three things that you said that I hope people will keep in mind as you hear my remarks. One is that when you reward criminal behavior, you get a lot more of it. Two, you said it's not funny when it happens to you. And alas, I have a personal story to tell. And three, you said letting criminals off the hook is not compassion, and it's not justice. So I want to agree very strongly with those 3 points that you just made, Chairman Van Drew, and I want to thank the witnesses for being with us today. Just before the shutdown, this subcommittee convened a field hearing in Charlotte to advance the tired, I would say utterly exhausted Republican claim that Democrats are somehow soft on crime. This is an odd proposition to me, given that Democratic-led cities today are now driving an historic nationwide decrease in crime, especially homicide and violent crime, following a dramatic spike in those categories under the first Trump administration. One North Carolina local news outlet, the News and Observer, captured the very paradoxical nature of that hearing in an article titled, "Republicans are in charge in North Carolina, but somehow Democrats are to blame for violent crime." Well, the News and Observer is correct. Republicans from the White House to Congress to the state houses are systematically undermining public safety in communities across America with what I would call gangster state policies, while claiming that Democrats are to blame. Well, what's really going on? Let's start with the administration's first day in office. How about that? On the first day, Donald Trump pardoned nearly 1,600 January 6th insurrectionists, people who either pled guilty or were convicted beyond a reasonable doubt by a jury of their peers for hundreds and hundreds of crimes, including hundreds who violently attacked Capitol Police officers, Metropolitan Police Department officers, Montgomery County, Maryland police officers from Virginia, and so on, with baseball bats, steel pipes, Trump flags, Confederate battle flags, broken furniture, and bear mace into people's eyes. In the months since, the Department of Justice proceeded to fire dozens of FBI agents and federal prosecutors, the most experienced federal prosecutors we had, career civil servants appointed under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, simply because they had worked in the January 6th investigation. Nothing like that had ever happened before in the history of the Department of Justice, and I hope nothing like that will ever happen again. These were career civil servants, expert criminal prosecutors fired because they had prosecuted people for violently attacking police officers, storming the Capitol, saying they were going to hang Mike Pence in order to overthrow a presidential election, and they got fired because of it. A massive violation of civil service, constitutional rights, and the principles of public safety. 140 of our officers were injured, wounded, disfigured, disabled, hospitalized on that day. 140 of them. I wish I could take 140 minutes and tell you about each one, but I'll tell you about one of them. I'll tell you about Sergeant Gunnell. Now, Sergeant Gunnell's written a book about his experience, which I recommend highly to all of you. His family were immigrants to America. He became a citizen as a kid, and he fell in love with police work. And his family took a trip to Washington, and they visited the Capitol, and he met police officers here. And he had a dream that he would become a Capitol police officer one day. And what do you know? He became a Capitol police officer after he served in the Army. And he went to Iraq, and he went to Afghanistan. And then he was here on January 6th. And he said he faced violence, which he described as medieval in nature, that was far worse than anything he had seen in combat in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And he fought for hours and hours. And he was so wounded, they destroyed a rotator cuff. His left foot was smashed and destroyed. He couldn't lift his shoulder. He was beaten in the face and the head. He did everything he could to try to get back to work, and the force told him he was just no longer physically fit to do it. Forced to retire by the insurrection Donald Trump incited, according to a bipartisan vote of the House of Representatives, which 57 of 100 senators voted to convict him on, the most widespread bipartisan vote in the history of presidential impeachments. And he was that wounded, that disfigured, that incapacitated. He could no longer serve. He had to leave his dream job and is now living on a fraction of what his income was before because of that violence that took place. That's just one story. I wish you could know all of the stories. Maybe you know the story of Michael Fanone. He was a D.C. cop. He wasn't even on duty here. He heard about it, that the Capitol was under attack on the radio. He immediately drove to the Capitol, got off several blocks away, ran to the scene to join the police officers. And he got pulled into the crowd after fighting for hours, and he had a heart attack. And he was afraid that he was going to die. And he begged them. He said, "I have 4 daughters. Spare my life." And his life was just barely spared. There's supposed to be a plaque up in the House of Representatives to the officers because of their indomitable valor and courage that day, but the Speaker won't put that up. And they won't give $1 to the families of any of these police officers whose lives have been so fundamentally altered. But they did sneak a little provision in to give $1 million to each Republican senator who were inconvenienced because they were treated like other American citizens, and their phone records were subpoenaed because they were involved in the conspirators of that attack. That's where the sympathies run. Each of those guys was going to get $1 million payout. At least, I think I heard Lindsey Graham today say he wanted tens of millions for what happened to him. What happened to him? Did he get sprayed in the face with bear mace? Did he have to fight for hours to protect American democracy? No, his phone records were subpoenaed the same way any American's phone records can be subpoenaed if they're involved in a criminal conspiracy or if their name comes up in a criminal investigation. And if you don't like that, you should support the bill that Chairman Jordan brought before us in markup yesterday, which we passed unanimously numerous times. That would save all Americans from abuse of that process. We've been trying to do that for nearly a decade, I believe, from this committee, and the Senate has consistently rejected it. They're not interested in protecting anybody else's civil liberties. They just want their $1 million jackpot payout. Well, in any event, so that was the story on January 6th, and this administration's done everything in its power now to reward the people who participated in it. Meantime, they're firing the officers, the FBI agents, the prosecutors who tried to prosecute it. Now, I want to tell you, though, a lot of people would want to sweep the whole thing under the rug, and they think it's over. But, you know, crime doesn't really work like that, and criminals don't work like that. As the good chairman said when he kicked this off, if you forgive crime, if you pardon it, if you let it go, you're going to see more of it. Well, let me tell you a little story about that, because we've got lots of cases of these pardoned criminals going out and committing other crimes. Let me tell you the ones that we found that have been committed by people that Donald Trump pardoned on his first day in office. They've gone on to do terroristic threats, home invasion, burglary, vandalism, theft, felony assault with a deadly weapon, discharge of a firearm, manslaughter, drunk driving, grand theft, aggravated kidnapping, reckless driving, reckless homicide, invasion of privacy, conspiracy to commit murder as a hate crime, possession of child pornography, violation of protective orders, assault, violation of anti-stalking order, DUI, battery, felony, malicious bodily injury, rape, forgery, sexual assault, illegal gun possession, drug possession, conspiracy to murder. Who's responsible for all that? These people were pardoned by Donald Trump. Sentences commuted. Out on the streets now, these people doing all of that. Let me tell you about one of them. I told you I was going to get a little bit personal here. I take the subject raised today personally. This guy's name is Taylor Taranto. He was pardoned after being convicted of multiple crimes on January 6th. Multiple crimes on January 6th. But he was rearrested in 2023 for illegal possession of hundreds of rounds of ammunition and 2 guns and a machete after he was live streaming from the woods near former President Barack Obama's house. He went there with all the ammunition and guns, and he threatened to set off a car bomb. Well, on the way there, he showed up at the elementary school 2 blocks away from my house, where all 3 of my kids went to elementary school. And he told listeners that he was at the elementary school near my house on his live stream. He said he was near my house That's where he was headed next. And he didn't want to tell anybody where I lived because he said, I want Raskin all to myself. Fortunately, my wife and I and my kids were not at home when he stopped there on his way down to Barack Obama's house. This is a January 6th insurrectionist who's been pardoned by Donald Trump. You may have read about him recently in the newspaper because at the sentencing for other crimes, 2 Department of Justice lawyers mentioned that he participated in the riots at January 6th, and his superior officers, the Department of Justice, objected to the fact that these DOJ lawyers had referred to the January 6th riots and suspended them. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if were they suspended? These lawyers were reprimanded for what they had done, and they were suspended simply for mentioning the reality that January 6th had taken place. Look, it's not just January 6th. Trump recently pardoned crypto executive Changpeng Zhao, who'd been sentenced to 4 months in prison in order to pay one of the largest corporate penalties in history after pleading guilty to enabling money laundering through his crypto exchange. According to prosecutors, he aided Hamas, he aided Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist networks, but Donald Trump pardoned him. He also pardoned Ross Ulbricht, the creator of Silk Road, an online black market that allowed thousands of drug dealers to distribute hundreds of kilos of illegal drugs, including heroin, cocaine, and opioids. Take Ghislaine Maxwell, who was transferred from a real prison to a prison camp after the number 2 at DOJ went to see her. On July 22nd, the Democrats on the Oversight Committee moved to subpoena her. They got Republicans to come over and agree. The next day, she was sent her subpoena. And the next day after that, July 24th, that's when Todd Blanche went to see her. Not to ask about more co-conspirators, not to investigate whether other crimes had been committed. No, he was trying to find out exactly what she might say about Donald Trump when she came to Congress. And satisfied with her answers, President Trump, the great champion of law and order, apparently authorized and approved her transfer to a prison camp where no sex offender had ever been sent before because they're not allowed, because sex offenders like Ghislaine Maxwell are considered violent offenders. But that wasn't it. It wasn't just enough that she got to cut the line and get there in 1 or 2 days when people are waiting 6 months, 8 months, 2 years to transfer after proving they have a compelling reason to do so. No, she was transferred overnight. She gets there, and then she gets the superstar Trump Hotel treatment. She gets room service in her cell. Ever hear of that before? Well, she gets meals brought to her. She gets special exercise privileges there. She gets special visitors that come whenever she wants them to come, and they're allowed to bring their computers. And they don't even deny that. They just say they want the people who brought that as whistleblowers to members of this committee, they want those people punished. And her lawyer was bragging about the fact that they were punished. In other words, that they suffered retaliation for speaking out, when this committee has always stood up for the rights of whistleblowers to tell the truth about abuse of law in America. Well, they've taken a wrecking ball to the federal government's ability to investigate and prosecute criminals. The DOJ is hemorrhaging thousands of lawyers. They're having a very difficult time recruiting people to this absurd environment where the president is taking over all prosecutorial functions. And now they are wasting resources just to follow the political program of Donald Trump. You've seen how he fired his own U.S. attorney, Mr. Siebert, in Virginia because he wouldn't bring charges against James Comey. That's what Donald Trump wanted. So he sacks him. He puts in another attorney who's never been a prosecutor before, never been an assistant U.S. attorney or anything. She's so incompetent, the judge in the Comey case now says that they're going to have to throw it out, likely, because she messed up the entire grand jury indictment process. And yet he continues to go after his political opponents. What a radical distortion of justice that is, and what a waste of our resources. They are draining resources away from human sex trafficking, away from child sex exploitation, away from drug trafficking, to go and either participate in their anti-immigration campaign or just to do whatever Donald Trump wants them to do. So, my friends, this is the record that they want to brag about when we've got real Democratic mayors across America who are, and some Republican mayors, but mostly Democratic mayors, who are actually reducing crime and fighting crime. I mean, what an outrage this is. One of the other things they did when they first got in was they got rid of hundreds of grants that were being given to local law enforcement, to the police. Talk about defunding the police. Well, they defunded the police. Certainly anything having to do with human sex trafficking, anything having to do with child sex exploitation, they just got rid of it all. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you said exactly what you did when you kicked this off. It's not funny when it happens to you, and it's not when you've got a pardoned January 6th person come into your house with weapons on his way down to Barack Obama's house with a machete. Now, that's not funny. And also, when you reward criminal behavior, as this administration has done from day one, you're going to get a lot more of it. And they're headed to turning us into a gangster state. And I thank you, and I look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses.
Thank the ranking member, and later on, I'm going to reply to a good number of those issues. I will say one thing: threats are horrible for all of us. My wife has been threatened. I've been threatened. My kids and my grandkids. It's really awful. It's terrible. My wife was, just so you know, I mean, I can relate to what you're saying there. My wife was threatened that she would be beaten. They would throw her on the hood of the car, rape her, and murder her, burn the house down, and kill my children and my grandchildren. So that is not a uniquely Democrat, Republican, conservative, or liberal issue. The other issues, and I will ask the committee if we can, and then we'll move on here. The issue at hand is what's happening on our streets. Those subjects you brought up are worthy of debate, and we can have a separate committee on all of it, all the things you spoke about. But I'm talking about the average Joe on the street in their city where they want to live their life with their children and their grandchildren as well. It's a little bit different than where we went with that, which was highly political, worthy of discussion, but not really what this hearing is about.
Those are all average crimes that happen every day on our streets, including my street.
Okay, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to. Even mine,
You cannot separate one crime from another.
There are people that are in prison because of some of the things they were going to do and got caught to me, but nevertheless, it's not an average crime. I'm a member of Congress. It is different. I'm talking about just the guy that comes home from work and is walking on the street and he stops by the grocery store and he gets killed. It's a different thing, just the average day-to-day thing. We'll talk about it more. I appreciate you, Mr. Raskin. With that being said, all other opening statements will be included in the record, and we're going to introduce today's witnesses. Finally, your time. We'll start with Mr. Rafael Mangual. Mr. Mangual is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, where his research focuses on criminal justice and policing. He is the author of Criminal Injustice and serves in the New York State Advisory Committee of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Mr. Mauro, Mr. Paul J. Mauro, is a former law enforcement officer, having served for 23 years with the New York Police Department. During his tenure, he served as the commanding officer of the NYPD's Legal Bureau and as the executive officer for operations and analysis in NYPD's Intelligence Bureau. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. Ms. Tina McKinney. Ms. McKinney, this is the hardest one. These are always hard. Is the mother of Officer Joseph McKinney, who was a Memphis police officer killed in the line of duty on April 12, 2024. The suspect was out on bond, and I want everybody to listen to this one paragraph. The suspect was out on bond from an arrest the previous month on charges of possession of modified semi-automatic weapons and grand larceny. Everybody heard that. I'm sorry, I got no words. I'm sure everybody tells you the same thing. Thank you for being here and trying to help other people in the future. Nancy Levine, did I pronounce it correctly? Good. Dr. Levine is the Dean of the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice, where her work focuses on applying data and research to criminal justice policy. She previously served in the Department of Justice during the Biden administration. We will thank you for being here. I'm a Rutgers grad. I went pre-dental, pre-medical, so I went to Rutgers. We may disagree, but Rutgers is on issues, but Rutgers is a good school. We're going to begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear under penalty of perjury, the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative, and thank you, and please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you do summarize and complete your summary of your testimony in 5 minutes. Mr. Mangual, we will start with you.
Well, thank you all so much for the opportunity to offer remarks on the all-important topic of public safety in America's cities, which is an issue that I've spent the last decade working on. I'd like to begin by suggesting that in public debates over questions of safety, far too much weight is put on aggregate crime measures that often fail to fully capture or accurately describe the risk of criminal victimization faced by America's urban residents. We often talk about crime in national, statewide, or citywide terms. It's an understandable colloquialism that I'm sure I've been guilty of too, but whether a city's crime levels are up or down, while important, can mask some important realities. In my home city of New York, for example, data from 2010, 15, and 20 illustrate that approximately 50% of the city's reported crime occurs on just 4% of the city's street segments. The experiences of residents living on block clusters where so much of a given city's crime concentrates are radically different from those living in the neighborhoods with very little crime. To paint the picture a little more vividly, consider that last year, residents of Chicago's 19th district, which I used to call home, experienced a homicide rate of just 2.3 per 100,000. In the 6th district, by contrast, the homicide rate was 73.4 per 100,000, almost 32 times greater. I make this point for a couple of reasons, but one is to just illustrate that even in cities that have experienced recent declines in serious crime, there remain microgeographic pockets where serious violence continues to occur at levels that we should all find unacceptable and should therefore be working to alleviate with urgency, irrespective of aggregate crime declines at the citywide level. The fact remains that in too many city neighborhoods, criminal violence is a serious problem, and that problem is one that is too often characterized by a particular type of failure, which is the failure to incapacitate violent criminal offenders who have thoroughly demonstrated through repeated criminal conduct that they have no desire to play by society's rules. A few numbers to consider. In Chicago, on average, a shooting or homicide suspect is arrested nearly 12 times. In Oakland, homicide victims and suspects alike have an average of 10 prior arrests. In Baltimore, the number is 9. And right here in Washington, D.C., it's 11. These numbers are bad enough in the abstract, but they take on a more urgent character when they are illustrated by specific cases. And because of the work I do, I'm often sent stories of heinous and tragic crimes committed by offenders who had no business being out on the street. We already heard about one such case in the case of Irina Zarutska in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I want you all to consider another case out of Charlotte, which has not gotten nearly enough attention, which is the shooting death of Jace Edwards. He was just 4 years old. According to news reports, one of the 4 men arrested in that case had previously been charged in nearly a dozen car thefts, and he was arrested again just days before the shooting with a firearm. Unbelievably to the uninitiated, he was allowed to post bond and was released yet again. A second suspect in that case had racked up 38 charges and had multiple prior incarcerations for serious felonies, including firearms and other violent charges. These examples all elicit the same question, which is why? Why were these offenders out? And the answer in many cases is that somewhere down the line, policymakers made a choice. They made a choice to pursue decarceration for its own sake because they were convinced that doing so was the best way to serve justice. The good news is that none of those decisions are written in stone. Our leaders can and must make different choices. In recent years, we've seen some encouraging examples of federal, state, and local leaders doing just that. In the state of Tennessee, for example, lawmakers have, thanks to the leadership of Tennessee House Speaker Cameron Sexton, passed legislation to amend their state's constitution so that judges there can have the right to detain dangerous criminal defendants in all cases. They also passed a truth in sentencing law to ensure offenders serve the majority of their sentences before they can be released. And last year, lawmakers in Louisiana took a similar step with their own truth in sentencing measure, much to the chagrin of criminal justice reform advocates, in addition to an effort to eliminate discretionary parole. And of course, President Trump's administration, through executive orders and actions related to policing and enforcement initiatives like the Memphis Safe Task Force and Project Safe Neighborhoods in Chicago, the latter of which has led to a nearly 300% increase in federal gun prosecutions just through the end of October. Now look, there remains a lot of work to be done, and so I'd like to close with the suggestion that I hope many of you will reach out to discuss further at a future date, which is that Congress should consider an omnibus crime bill along the lines of what was done in 1994, this time with a particular focus on police recruitment and retention, funding the acquisition of force multiplying technologies, incentivizing better data collection, and incentivizing the adoption of stronger penalties for habitual offenders. Thank you once again for the invitation to address this body and contribute to these important discussions. I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mangual. Mr. Mauro, you may begin.
Chairman, ranking members, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Paul Mauro. I served 26 years with the NYPD, including many years in counterterrorism following 9/11. I retired 4 years ago. I'm now a practicing attorney. My perspective is shaped by decades on the street and doing investigations and by my concern for the city that I still call home. New York's recent criminal justice system and its history is one of collapse, renewal, and now sadly decline. The city's recovery from the dark days of the 70s and 80s began in the 1990s under mayors who prioritized policing and accountability and was aided by the bipartisan 1994 crime bill, co-authored by then-Senator Joe Biden and signed by President Clinton. Broken windows policing complemented that effort by addressing a low-level disorder before it grew into something worse. Enforcement was often limited to summonses, not jail, and was responsive to community complaints. Neighborhoods revived and the entire city became a model of recovery. After the new challenges of 9/11, the NYPD created a world-class counterterrorism apparatus without sacrificing safety. Despite expectations post-9/11, crime continued to fall under Mayor Bloomberg and Commissioner Ray Kelly. Later, during Commissioner William Bratton's tenure of 2014 through 2016, index crime fell another 9%, while the jail population dropped 18%, proof that safety and reduced incarceration can coexist. In fact, over the 20 years at that point, crime had fallen 76% while the jail population was cut in half. We had hit the sweet spot. Over the ensuing years, however, that success has eroded. Reforms such as no cash bail and other changes have coincided with visible disorder. Disorderly conduct summonses, for instance, the linchpin of quality of life enforcement, fell 91% after 2015. Recruitment and retention are in crisis, though murders and shootings are down this year. Major felonies are up 16% since 2010 in New York, and low-level recidivism is universal. Behind those figures lies a deeper problem. The Federal National Crime Victimization Survey shows that the vast majority of crime now goes unreported nationwide. Street conditions, in my own experience in New York, bear this out. For instance, homeless encampments are referred to agencies with no enforcement power. Shops close after repeated harassment, and burglaries go unreported. Officers are not lazy, they are overwhelmed. A small fraction of offenders and chronically mentally ill drive much of this disorder. Research suggests that incarcerating or housing just a small fraction of the worst offenders would visibly improve conditions. And an uncomfortable truth is that women are disproportionately targeted by the mentally ill. Likewise, the New York Times found that 327 repeat offenders account for roughly 1/3 of all New York shoplifting arrests. Stores write off these losses as shrinkage and pass the cost on to consumers. In New York, we now lock up our toothpaste, not our perpetrators. At the same time, and most alarmingly, the city is closing the Rikers Island jail and replacing it with 4 dispersed jails that cut the prisoner bed count by a full 2/3. This is a guaranteed recipe for failure. Our newly elected mayor, Zohran Mamdani, has famously pledged to lean into all of these reforms, reducing police headcount, replacing officers with social workers, and eliminating key police units. Nationwide, the role of the National Guard remains widely misunderstood. In New York, since 9/11, the Guard has manned New York City transit hubs without incident. Governor Kathy Hochul's deployment of 1,000 troops to the subways has been touted by her for providing a 42% drop in subway crime. Note that the Guard does not answer 911 calls. They provide deterrence through visibility. New York has long been a testing ground for criminal justice policy. We know what works if we are allowed to do it. Federal government can help with funding, certainly. It can even condition funding on best practices by local agencies. But most importantly, federal leaders can help change the narrative. When leaders support police, that message is felt on the street. When they vilify police, that message is felt even more. Is it any wonder that since 2019, assaults on NYPD officers are up 63%? First duty of government is to protect its citizens. Public safety should never be subordinated to politics. Every community, whatever its politics, wants the same thing, to live safely and with dignity. Those who secure that safety deserve our support, not our scorn. I thank you all for allowing me the privilege of speaking with you here today.
Thank you, Mr. Mauro. Ms. McKinney, you may begin.
Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Tina McKinney, and I'm the mother of Memphis Police Officer Joseph McKinney, lovingly known as Rusty. Rusty died in the line of duty April 12th, 2024 in Memphis, Tennessee. He was just 26 years old. He was a devoted father who had just purchased wedding rings and was eager to build a life with his fiancée. Rusty lived a lifetime only few get to have. He had a large family who adored him, and he loved to travel. If you said you wanted to go anywhere, he was there with you. He wanted to go. His eagerness was undeniable. He was a good kid, the kind every parent hoped for. He lived a full life with an eagerness to help, and it lasted his entire short life, way too short. Rusty was an Eagle Scout, a distinction that takes years of dedication and discipline and service, from camping in every kind of Memphis Mid-South weather to countless hours of community service. He lived the values of scouting every day, and it shaped the man he became. Deep down, he always wanted to be a police officer. When he was 5 or 6, he would dress up as an officer for Halloween and ride on his electric police motorcycle all through the yard. When he was older, looking for a career, he would chat with officers who encouraged him to join the police department. It's hard to write about him. I feel cheated, and I feel robbed of all the what could have been and the life he could have had. He was loved by so many, and after the news of his death, stories poured in from friends, co-workers, and strangers. A young man shared how Rusty made him feel welcome when he had started his first job. He was nervous, but Rusty took him in and made him feel a part of the team, and that kindness Rusty showed him stayed with him. And a co-worker of mine had told me her daughter had received a ticket from Rusty when he was on the force, and shared how she remembered him as kind and respectful. But the one thing everyone said, from the hundreds who attended his service, was that Rusty and our family did not deserve this tragedy. And they were right. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was a failure of leadership and a failure of accountability. My son was a police officer, but he was also a victim. A victim of repeat offenders, one who was a juvenile, and a victim of failed policies and failed leaders. God gives us a life, but He doesn't promise how long it will last or how good it will be. Instead, He gives us choices that shape the life we live. And Rusty chose service, compassion, and integrity. Those two criminals, they repeatedly chose violence and a life of crime. Those young men were out on bond despite being arrested just weeks earlier for serious crimes, and they are responsible for my son's death through their actions and by their choices they made. Dangerous repeat offenders are not isolated incidents for the city of Memphis. It is a result of years of political neglect, soft on crime policies, and a justice system that has prioritized leniency over accountability, and judges who release high-risk offenders and district attorneys who start pilot programs to identify cases to downgrade to misdemeanors. Management and long delays with issuing car tags made it impossible for officers to enforce basic traffic laws, contributing to a breakdown in public safety. Memphis has also been losing officers, not just to violence, but to attrition. They have faced reduced pay, loss of benefits, and lack of support from city leaders. The Memphis Police Department has struggled to retain talent while crime surged, and while our leaders debate referendums and engage in political optics, family like mine pay the ultimate price. Public officials entrusted with leadership who have repeatedly failed to uphold the standards of their position, raising serious concerns about judgment and accountability. Some proposed defunding law enforcement and introduced proposals to cut police budgets. Those proposals were widely criticized and widely rejected. The school board has mismanaged children's futures in Memphis. Former Shelby County School Superintendent Dr. Murray Fagan stated many members of the board chose chaos over children, and I believe the statement to be true. Students' poor performance is beyond poor. Our school system ranks in the bottom 50% statewide. Students lack basic math skills and reading skills. Despite spending exorbitant amounts of money per student, the district has failed to deliver results. Millions in state and federal funds have been spent, yet proficiency in some areas has dropped as low as 5%. Instead of investing in proven solutions, the board has spent millions on studies and administrative overhead. Educational failures are not separate from the rise in crime. They are deeply connected. A weak education system feeds weak communities, and weak communities suffer the consequences of crime and strained police. Accountability must be more than a word. It must be a standard. It must apply to individuals who commit violent acts and to those leaders whose decisions enable those acts. Without accountability, justice is incomplete and safety is compromised. Police officers take the job knowing the worst may happen, but it's up to those in the position of power to protect them. They ensure they have the best environment to work in and to know that the system will work together to make a safe place for all to call home. My son went to work, as do all officers, with a sense of hope and optimism that they can make a difference and a hope of coming home to the families who love them. I urge you to listen to the voices of grieving families like mine. Rusty deserved better. Memphis deserves better. Rusty had a job with MPD, but he was so much more to everyone in his personal life. We all lost so much when he was taken from us. My son died. He gave his last breath, saving a fellow officer and pushing her to the ground when the bullets started to fly. He gave his life serving a city that tragically did not protect him in return, and by continually allowing repeat offenders to be released and to commit more crimes. Crime has taken a toll on me, and I would not travel to Memphis unless it was necessary, and many individuals felt the same. But with the increased state troopers and federal agencies embedded in Memphis after the death of my son, Memphis is beginning to change. People are venturing out, and people are trying to enjoy the city again. And they are thanking city officials for allowing those agencies to come in. Rusty died a hero. He protected others as he died. He gave his life. It's time for our leaders to protect those who remain, bring the National Guard, and keep the federal agencies who are involved in the city until criminals realize crime doesn't pay anymore in Memphis and playtime is over. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of my son and the family and our community in Memphis.
Thank you for your courage. You represent many, many other people. I see his handsome face there. It is unfortunately now the story of most major American cities. Dr. Levine, you may begin.
Chairman Van Drew, Ranking Member Crockett, Mr. Raskin, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Let's start with some facts. Violent crime is down to pre-pandemic levels or even lower in most every U.S. city. That started around 2022, not when Mr. Trump started office in January of this year. Nationwide, violent crime is down 50% from its peak in 1991. But despite these gains, I'm not going to sit here and say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's because every bit of violent crime is unacceptable. Every life lost is a tragedy. We can do more and we should do more. That said, the reductions in violent crime rate that I just quoted to you, those are real statistics. We're clearly doing something right. And to that I say, if it's working, don't break it. That's precisely what this administration is doing. It's breaking it by deploying armed guards to cities uninvited by local leaders, by canceling grants that support violent crime interventions, by cutting support for crime victim services, and by reducing investments in research on what works to promote safety. Now, to be clear, I'm certain that sending in the Guard will suppress crime in the short run. The research is strong that increasing police presence can reduce crime, but much depends on how they're trained, how they're deployed, and how they interact with community members. Sending in a surge of National Guards and other federal officers into cities can keep residents away for fear. It can curb tourism. It can hurt local economies. The Guard lacks local expertise. They don't know the stakeholders, the players. They don't know how to resolve issues peacefully because of that lack of local knowledge. That can erode trust even after they pull out because residents don't distinguish between one type of law enforcement officer and another. Guards aren't trained for civilian policing and things like de-escalation and crisis intervention. That type of training matters. Is there a better role for law enforcement, federal law enforcement, in dealing with local crime issues? Absolutely. One example is DOJ's Project Safe Neighborhoods, PSN. It's been in operation since 2001. It's been going strong across various administrations. It's a partnership between U.S. attorneys' offices and the local police. It's a proven success. It's been rigorously evaluated. It can result in reduced violence. But this administration is breaking that too, advising U.S. attorneys to divert resources away from PSN to, you guessed it, immigration prosecutions. So aside from federal law enforcement presence or partnership, what are other ways to reduce violence? I'll lift up one example from my home city of Newark, New Jersey. The Newark Community Street Team. It's a community-based violence intervention effort. It launched in 2015. Since then, homicides are down 65% in the city of Newark. But federal funding for the Newark Community Street Team was cut this year, along with dozens of other grants for community violence intervention programs. Whatever we do to address issues of violent crime, we should make sure that it's a wise use of taxpayer dollars. Research and evaluation can help us to discern that return on investment, what works, what doesn't, what should be continued, what should be disbanded. But the Department of Justice canceled dozens of grants to evaluate crime reduction programs. It also canceled translational efforts like crimesolutions.gov, which helps make findings from research accessible to local leaders, practitioners, police chiefs, so that they can implement evidence-based practices. And what about the victims? Services can help them heal, but they're also essential in preventing re-victimization. If Congress truly cares about violent crime, they care about victims, right? Yet this administration terminated hundreds of millions of dollars in victim service grants. In closing, safer communities come from evidence, they come from partnership, they come from respect for local expertise. So instead of letting this administration break strategies that work, Congress should restore and invest in them. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will now begin with questions. We will proceed under the 5-minute rule, and I am going to recognize the gentleman from the great state of Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've seen crime rise in Democrat-ran cities, including in my home state of Alabama in the two largest Democrat-ran cities, that would be Birmingham and Montgomery. Senator Tuberville has noted that he would be supportive of the National Guard coming in to help local police departments in Alabama with rising crime. Mr. Mangual, have we seen an improvement enough that would warrant the National Guard coming to Alabama from these other cities where we obviously like D.C., where we've deployed the Guard?
Yeah, so I do think that there's some pretty significant evidence that the deployment of the National Guard, whether it's in Washington, D.C., or in some of the other places where it's been deployed, has had a beneficial deterrent effect through the presence, right? The problem, to the extent that there is one, is that those benefits are going to be limited. And so I think it's best that those kinds of efforts are coupled with other federal agency deployments and prioritizations of things like 922G cases, which are gun prosecutions, gang prosecutions, et cetera.
Yeah, so far, since the operation started in D.C., we've had nearly 3,100 arrests and 300 firearms seized. What does that tell you about the depth of unchecked criminal activity prior to the National Guard being here?
I mean, I think it tells you that, Washington, D.C., like many other American cities, has been for a long time under-policed, right? When you have additional resources coming in and they're able to make significant numbers of arrests, that tells you that, the city did not have what it needed beforehand, and that should be a lesson to the leaders to add to the force size.
And if the resources for policing are there, Mr. Mauro, you may want to touch on this too as well. These soft-on-crime DAs, when they just turn the folks back out, doesn't that go against, just certainly the morale in the police departments? If we have politicians criticizing police officers, when we're soft on them after they go through the trouble to make an arrest, to try to get somebody, put them behind the bars, and then we turn them right back out, and in the case of Ms. McKinney, we have officers and individuals attacked again. Mr. Mauro, doesn't that hurt the morale as even if we have the policing resources, if we turn the people right back out, isn't that going to create a problem for society?
Well, of course it does, sir. And the result can be, in some instances, therefore, a lack of enforcement. If you make, let's say, an arrest for a low-level offense that should go downtown, so to speak, and when you get there, it's DP'd, as they call it, decline prosecution. When that happens regularly, you begin to understand that it's not what the system you work for wants. And so I'm very cognizantly choosing that example because it's one of the things that led to the beginning of the disorder in our subways. The lifeblood of New York City is the subway system. That's the city's circulatory system. And jumping fares, as they call it, fare beating, is one of the ways that the entire policing revolution that we had in the 90s was really founded on that as one of the principal enforcement mechanisms. Because not everybody who jumps the turnstile is a member of a robbery crew, certainly. But if you are a member of a robbery crew, you're not paying the fare. And so when somebody jumps the turnstile and you give them just a summons, and it turns out that they have 2 robbery warrants on them, well, now you have the ability to take them off the street. And that has a cascading effect on the safety in the system. And that was really one of the broken windows linchpins. And ultimately what happens is when that is no longer enforced, and I should mention that the district attorneys in New York, we have 5, at least 4 literally don't enforce that crime. It's on right in the day one, the infamous day one memo of Alvin Bragg, saying we're not going to enforce that anymore. Now I would argue that that's not even within his power. That's the legislature that has to repeal an entire statute. Nobody's challenged that, and so on it goes. But consequently, people who would have been kept off that system now feel with impunity to jump the turnstile, go in through the outdoor, they don't pay, and now they have easy access to a place that they can commit crimes, get out of there quickly, etc. And so in addition to morale, it leads to a lack of enforcement.
So they basically just lose concern about if it's that broken window principle. If you don't stop them there, then the crime just escalates, and certainly individuals who are jumping the turnstiles. You said Governor Kathy Hochul, right, had moved a guard into the subways, and they were just there as a presence to deter, right? That's kind of, they're not really arresting people.
No, they don't follow the 911 system. It's not like they're getting deployed to go on particular police jobs, quote unquote. They're there for what's called their omnipresence. And you see it all over New York. It's been underway, as I mentioned, since 9/11. So that's 25 years without incident. You see them in the Oculus, downtown, which is a big transportation hub. You see them in Penn Station, in Grand Central. They just stand there. But because they're there, it takes weight off of the police, and it sends the message that this area is observed. So very often perpetrators will move on.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple of UCs before we move on. First, I have a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report written by Chandler Hall titled "Cities in Blue States Experiencing Larger Declines in Gun Violence in 2023."
Without objection.
Then I have another one. It is by Chandler Hall again, titled "The Highest Rates of Gun Homicides Are in Rural Counties."
Without objection.
My next one is written by Jeff Asher, titled "Trump Doesn't Have the Data to Back Up His Claims About Washington, D.C."
Without objection.
And my final one is written by Kylie Murdoch and Jim Kessler, titled "The 21st Century Red State Murder Crisis."
Without objection.
Thank you so much.
I now recognize the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm deeply disappointed about this hearing. It was billed as an exploration of the Trump-Vance administration restoring law and order through the deployment of the military onto the streets of America. That's what we were here to talk about, and I haven't heard one Republican witness talk about that. How the military, the National Guard, has decreased crime on the streets of America. That's what this is supposed to be about. And so somebody has lied, just like Trump lied. He lied about releasing the Epstein files. He lied about putting America first. He lied about lowering cost on day one.
Mr. Johnson, if I can just interrupt for a minute. All our witnesses are kind enough to be here. They're not here as a Republican or Democrat. Their own views are to themselves on all. I will say for all of them, none of them are intentionally lying, and they swore an oath. So I appreciate your comments, but please move on.
I'm not casting aspersions at the witnesses. I'm saying that this hearing was billed as something that it has not turned out to be. We're supposed to be talking about how the deployment of the military onto the streets of America
This is your chance,
has lessened crime.
This is your chance.
And I think it's a fair argument for me to make that we have misled the public just like Donald Trump has misled the public. And the public, the American Joe or the average Joe on the street is feeling like a sucker now because Trump is telling them that, look, don't believe your lying eyes, prices are down. But they know that price of groceries is up, the price of energy is up, the price of their health care is up. But yet Donald Trump is telling them, believe what I say. They're getting tired of that. They looked at this drama with the Epstein files. They saw him go from doing everything he could to prevent the release into flipping at the last minute so as to save the little face that he still has because he knew he was going to lose that vote, and he lost it. Every single member of Congress, except for one, voted to release the Epstein files. And so the American people are really confused at this point. They see MAGA Republicans in the House carrying President Trump's water. They're not happy about that. And fortunately, they have a shining light to look at. Her name is Marjorie Taylor Greene, and she has started to move away from the deception, from the lies and deceit and from the violence. And because of that, she's now being subjected to violence. But let me ask you a question, Mr. Mangual, since although you've been to law school, your training has been as a corporate communications guy with the International Trademark Association, but you're here to talk about how the military has made our streets more safe. I'll ask you this question. Law enforcement is a noble profession, isn't it?
It is.
And it has special education and certification. Isn't that correct?
It does.
Specialized skills that you get from learning to become a police officer like Miss McKinney's son, and I'm so I'm saddened by your loss, and my condolences to you, Miss McKinney. But law enforcement officers, isn't it true, Mr. Mauro, are trained professionals?
Yes, sir.
And they take a different oath than does the military. Isn't that correct?
Well, I'm not familiar with the military.
Because you never served in the military, but the military is trained to combat, to be in combat situations, whereas law enforcement officers are trained to enforce the law. So isn't it a fact, Dr. Levine, that if we have people who are trained in combat deployed to the streets of America, that we're doing law enforcement a disservice, because law enforcement depends on the respect and support of the people who they serve? Isn't it true that by deploying the military to the streets, we are hurting law enforcement?
I think it can be demoralizing to local law enforcement to have the National Guard come in as if they aren't capable of doing their jobs. And you're right, they're trained specifically to be policing in a civilian
To come in
context.
and break things up and kill people. That's what the military does, right?
I don't know about that.
Well, that's not what police officers are trained to do.
Correct.
With that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman.
And before I do, though, let me offer for unanimous consent a article entitled Portland Police Chief Reveals Troops Tear Gas Protest by Accident. That's in the New Republic on October 29th. Without objection?
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I now recognize Dr. Onder from the great state of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Unfortunately, I'm all too familiar with high-crime cities. A part of my district is on the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri, a city that has consistently had one of the highest homicide rates in the country. In fact, I myself, all the way back in 2005, was a victim of a violent crime. I was robbed at gunpoint. And unfortunately, the crime rate in that region has only gotten worse. Just last year, Missouri's Attorney General testified before this committee that the state had to remove a St. Louis prosecutor for prioritizing politically motivated cases over violent offenders, including murderers. And the families hardest hit are in these neighborhoods, these inner city neighborhoods are the ones that pay the price. For years, failed leadership and neglected public safety have left entire communities trapped in fear. In St. Louis, Democrat policies have worsened a crisis that was undermining law enforcement and refusing to hold violent criminals accountable. The primary responsibility of government has always been to protect citizens by upholding law and order. When local officials abandon that duty, communities crumble. When prosecutors refuse to prosecute, crime grows. And when politics outweigh public cities, the results are the experience of St. Louis, Chicago, New York City, Charlotte, and others. Record violence, collapsing trust in institutions, and violent neighborhoods. These policies trap generations, they crush hope, and we have to break that pattern. Real compassion means telling young people that we believe that we can do better and that choices have consequences. Accountability is not punishment for its own sake. It is a path to safer streets, stronger families, and communities that can thrive. Mr. Mangual, is there a way that Congress can hold local officials accountable for refusing to enforce the law and refusing federal assistance during periods of sustained violent crime?
I think the best thing that Congress can do in this way to hold these local officials accountable is to condition more of the funds that so many American cities depend on best practices with respect to law enforcement and prosecution.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, in not only in New York City do you lock up the toothpaste, not the perpetrators, but that in the my staff tells me that in the Navy Yard area of Washington, D.C., they lock up the toothpaste at the CVS. Ms. McKinney, just a quick question for you, and I am so sorry for the loss of your brave and heroic son. You mentioned one of the murderers was out on bond. Do you know, was he out on cash bond, or was he just released without essentially without any financial incentive to return?
Sir, I'm really not sure.
That's all right. No. It's very common these days. One of these soft on crime policies that so many times is instituted in some of these soft on crime cities and states has been the end of what's called cash bail, which is to say no bail at all, just letting the suspects go free. Mr. Mauro, you're with the Manhattan or Mangual. You were with Manhattan Institute. Shortly after I was elected to the Missouri Senate in August of 2014, of course, very famously, the Michael Brown death and the subsequent riots led to just, I think, the very unfortunate phenomenon, which I think Heather McDonald at Manhattan Institute, popularized the Ferguson effect. Explain that, and how can we turn things around? I think it's the opposite of what Mr. Mauro describes: broken windows, policing, enforcing fares, and so on.
That's exactly right. I mean, the Ferguson effect basically describes a phenomenon in which, in the wake of a viral police incident that was controversial, so much public scrutiny and vitriol was lobbed at the institutions of law enforcement that it basically discouraged line officers from being proactive. And one of the best sort of academic demonstrations of this was done in a study by Roland Fryer and Tanaya Devi out of Harvard, where they looked at 5 American cities over a 2-year period and looked at which ones were targeted by the federal government under either President Barack Obama, most of them under President Barack Obama, for civil rights enforcement actions in the wake of viral police use of force incidents. And what they found was a massive increase in felony offenses, homicide offenses specifically, and the mechanism that they believed most explained that increase in crime was a pullback on the part of line officers with respect to proactive
Every law
activity.
enforcement fears being the next Darren Wilson. Thank you. I yield back.
And Mr. Chair,
I thank the gentleman, yes.
Sorry. Before you go on, I have 2 UC requests. One is from the Council on Criminal Justice, which states, examining trends over a longer period, St. Louis has had a far larger reduction in some violent and property crimes than other large American cities. The homicide rate in St. Louis was 40% lower in the first half of this year than it was in the first half of the first year of the pandemic.
Without objection.
And then the second one is I ask unanimous consent for an article that was written by Stephanie Wiley titled How Profit Shapes the Bail Bond System, published by the Brennan
Without
Center.
objection.
Thank you.
I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, from the great state of Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McKinney, I want to extend to you my sympathy for your horrible loss. As a father who lost a son who was a year younger than your son, I cannot know your pain or your experience, but I know you live with it every day, and my heart goes out to you. Ms. McKinney and Mr. Mauro, in fact, all of the witnesses have underscored the importance, as Mr. Mauro put it, I think, of voicing support for the police. And we voted to create a plaque. I mean, it wasn't a memorial fund for anyone. It wasn't money to go to families, but at least it was a plaque to honor the work of the officers who defended us with their lives. And it reads, "On behalf of a grateful Congress, this plaque honors the extraordinary individuals who bravely protected and defended this symbol of democracy on January 6, 2021. Their heroism will never be forgotten." It was supposed to have been put up in the Capitol 2 years ago. It has still not been put up, and I thought I would start with an easy one, just a yes or no question. Would you agree that Speaker Johnson should put this plaque up as provided for in federal law? Dr. Levine, I can start with you.
Yes.
Ms. McKinney?
Yes.
Mr. Mauro?
Yes.
And Mr. Mangual?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I want to go to just quickly back to the question of the pardons, because it seems like our soft on crime president is so beholden to the MAGA militia that he's actually pardoned some of the people he already pardoned because they've gotten back in trouble. As I was reading the long list of crimes they've already engaged in, he recently pardoned a woman who was separately convicted of threatening to shoot FBI agents who were investigating a tip that she may have been at the Capitol, and she threatened to shoot them. And then he pardoned another insurrectionist from Kentucky who'd been arrested for illegally possessing 6 firearms and 4,800 rounds of ammunition. And just question to you, Dr. Levine, what message is sent by these repeated pardons for people who just participated in the insurrection surrounding the attempted overthrow of the 2020 presidential election?
I think the best way to answer that is to quote Chairman Van Drew, who said in his opening remarks, "When you take away consequences, you get chaos."
Okay, and Mr. Mauro, let me come back to you, because you invoked the broken windows thesis by James Q. Wilson. Piqued my ears. He was my professor when I was in school, so I was always, I wrote a paper about it. I was always fascinated by it. And also, we had a lot of broken windows here on January 6, 2021, in addition to a lot of broken bones. And I wonder, I read that long list, I won't go through the whole thing again, but of crimes that have been committed since the pardons took place by people who were pardoned, including terroristic threats, home invasion, burglary, vandalism, theft, not offenses directed at politicians. I'm afraid the chairman misunderstood my point. He seemed to think that I was talking about these crimes being directed just at politicians. I'm talking about these being common crimes that were committed by people who were pardoned, people going out and just robbing other people's houses, having nothing to do with politics. But my question for you on broken windows, are you surprised that people who were given the remarkable, extraordinary, almost unheard of privilege of a presidential pardon quickly going back out on the road and doing things like burglary, vandalism, theft, home invasion, terroristic threats? And what does that say in the context of broken windows?
All I would say relative to January 6th is that if we're going to speak about the conditions in our cities, I'm hearing a great deal about January 6th. I'm hearing a tremendous amount about Donald Trump. But that's not what you feel on the street. And January 6th, nobody supports, certainly I don't. Nobody wants to see people in Viking horns walking around inside our Capitol behaving that way. I can't,
Okay, I'm
not
going to
going
reclaim
to
my time.
excuse, I'm not going to excuse anything
I'm sorry,
that
you
went
would
on.
invoke James Q. Wilson about the broken windows hypothesis, which is that if
Well, would you
let
apply it? Would you
I'm
apply it?
reclaiming, Mr. Chairman, will you direct him to
Apply it to
stop
the
talking?
apply it to the migrants.
I've reclaimed my time. You might not understand the rules here,
Mauro,
but we have
Mr.
rules.
Mauro, actually, your thought was one of the better thoughts I've heard all day today. I appreciate it. It is the gentleman's time, the ranking member's time. Thank you.
Please restore my time if you would. Let me come to you, Dr.
We will
Levine, on
restore
that.
your time.
The broken windows hypothesis is that if you allow people to get away with a crime at a certain level, and you send them the message it's okay, then they will go out and commit other crimes and more serious crimes. And that's what I think we're seeing here. What do you think, and I know you haven't written a paper on this because I looked at your extensive scholarship, but what do you think about the proposition, well, that there are political crimes and we can forgive all of those, and those people will not take it as a permission slip to go out and commit other crimes? Does that seem right?
No, sir, it doesn't, although I'm so tempted to geek out on what broken windows really was, according to George Kelling and James Q. Wilson. George Kelling was on faculty at the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice for years, and it wasn't about enforcement. It was really about how visible signs of disarray and disorder can send a signal that places are vulnerable for crime. And fixing those broken windows. It wasn't about
Which is why I was pointing out we had millions of dollars
right.
of broken windows here in addition to all of the
Yes.
bloodshed and the people.
Time has expired.
I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I will yield myself 5 minutes. Just a few quick questions and a couple thoughts. And I agree with you, by the way, Mr. Moore. Right now, we can have another hearing on Epstein. We can have another hearing on January 6th, really trying to talk to people about the people on the street and what they're going through when they live in many of these areas throughout the country. That's what we're supposed to be here for. With that, I'm sorry I have to just digress a tiny second. The Epstein files, just so we all know, Epstein was indicted under President Trump's administration. He was arrested during Trump's administration. Maxwell was indicted during the Trump administration, was arrested during the Trump administration. So let's set the facts straight. Mr. Mauro, I have a question for you, and if you can answer briefly. You know, Democratic Party's changed, and again, I don't want to get political here, but you're right. I mean, if I understood what you were saying, there used to be a bipartisan agreement, probably back around the 90s, I don't know the exact years, President Clinton, other noted Democrats that really cared, that as Democrats, they might have been different in vision with Republicans on some issues, fiscal and otherwise, but keeping our streets safe for the men and women who live in the country, especially in urban areas, wasn't that a bipartisan effort? Wasn't that a different kind of Democrat than what we're seeing now?
The tremendous success in New York City relative to driving down crime that began in the 90s began post-Giuliani. Everybody thought it was going to go away. Under Democrat mayor, a police commissioner serving under a Democratic mayor, in fact, two, Raymond Kelly and William Bratton.
And Mr. Mauro, thank you for that. And my point is, this is a whole new deal now going on with Democrats. This is a different world. This isn't those Democrats back then. This is Mondami is not Bill Clinton, is not that type of a Democrat at all. Mondami, in fact, wants to take, I'm sure you heard about it, I'm sure you are upset about it, all misdemeanors. There would be no more misdemeanors. I mean, it's unbelievable. The second issue I wanted to talk about is real quickly, I mean, this sounds like a stupid question, but why are we locking up our toothpaste, our mouthwash, our just common things, cough medicine? I mean, what's going on?
This is a salient question. 327 career perpetrators identified by the New York Times now account for a full 1/3 of all the shoplifting in New York City. That's driving these numbers. The point that I tried to make in my opening statement was that we're not talking about locking up vast numbers of people now to change the dynamic on the street. What we learned from broken windows and where we are right now is if there was some surgical enforcement on people who are identified, and we just took those steps, conditions would be greatly improved. These are the kinds of real things that I was hoping we could talk about today.
The stuff that affects people because they're paying more for their goods and services because of it, that makes them feel nervous, they don't like it, it shouldn't be that way. Next question. Isn't part of, this, you can cook the books and statistics. We keep hearing about the statistics. Go out in the street. I know Newark well, doctor. I know it well. I, spent plenty of time there going to continuing education courses at Rutgers University. And I'm going to say that if you went to Newark in North Jersey or Irvington or many of the other cities up there, and if you go into the cities in my area, Pleasantville, Atlantic City, there's a lot of concern from safety, particularly people of color because they live there and they have that concern. But with that saying, isn't part of the statistics, there's low morale, there's less staffing, there's less prosecution, There's less arrests, you just let it go by. So of course, with less prosecution and less arrest, you're gonna have lower numbers. Is there any accuracy to what I say?
Yes.
Exactly. So let's do the real deal. Let's talk about what's really happening. We made it so damn hard for a cop to be a cop and just so disgusted and demoralized with it, they just don't bother unless it's the most serious of situations. I've had cops in D.C. last year tell me that when I actually witnessed something. Let me ask this, Ms. McKinney. Again, sorry to ask questions to you because I know you've gone through a lot. Thank you for being here. I know the condolences and the sorrow means a lot, but would it maybe mean more to you if we enacted policies so that what happened to your son never happened to somebody else again?
Definitely.
That means more than the condolences, doesn't it?
It would, especially
Yeah.
in Memphis. That's
would-
why with the National Guard there, I know some people are against having the National Guard in big cities or anywhere on U.S. territory. I feel that the National Guard in Memphis, just their presence alone has made a difference. They don't do police.
And may I ask a question related to, real quick for all of you, and then I'm done. Do you believe that the National Guard, the men and women in the Guard, are capable of being on those city streets and doing good and not doing harm? And that they're not just going to be warriors that are going out shooting people and beating them up? Mr. Mangual, yes or no answer?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
Mr. Mauro?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that puts that away. I thank you. I thank all of you. With that,
I have UCs.
I bet you do.
I mean, you asked different questions. I got answers. My first UC, I asked unanimous consent to enter into the record an article titled DOJ cancels $500 million in public safety grants, cuts officer safety and crime prevention programs, published by Police One on August 18th, 2025.
Without objection.
I also have one where it is entitled Public Safety Groups Face an Uncertain Future Months After Federal Grant Cuts, published by the National Public Radio.
Without objection.
I also have one that says Justice Department slashes essential services for crime victims, published by the Brennan Center.
Without objection.
I have one that says, let's see, this is by The Guardian. It's published March 27th, 2025. Trump cut 69 global programs tackling child labor and human trafficking.
Without objection.
I have another one that says, this is written by Michael Waldman, titled Trump Defunds Effective Crime Prevention Policies, published by the Brennan Center, July
Without
of
objection.
25. I have another one that says, it's by Nicole, I can't pronounce Nicole's last name. Crime prevention efforts face setbacks after federal cuts.
Without objection.
I have another one that says, federal cuts to behavioral health will harm public safety, from September 23rd of 2025.
Without objection.
And my final one on this issue, so we can put this to rest. I asked unanimous consent. This is written by Nick Wilson, titled, The Trump Administration's Budget Will Undermine ATF's Efforts to Prevent Violent Crime. This was published by the Center for American Progress on July 9th, 2025.
Without objection, I would remind everyone that those are, in sincerity, mostly left-wing publications, and I could come and put a lot of UCs in for publications that would disagree with that totally.
I have okay.
So my point being, let me just finish my point, it's not going to put anything to rest, and you know that.
Well, but Mr. Chairman, I will ask, if you do have any UCs that say the opposite about these federal cuts, as if they didn't happen, please enter them into the record so that we can have it in the congressional record that these cuts were not made. I just would like it to be, I want us to have an accurate record.
Mr.
Not
Chairman,
necessarily the cuts, but the result of the cuts are two different things, where you're spending money and if you're spending money that's effective.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I just have 4, not 7, I think I just counted.
Without objection.
So this is in Reuters, federal drug prosecutions fall to lowest level in decades as Trump shifts focus to deportations. This one is the Washington Post, November 10, 2025. No longer liberal publication, by the way. Justice Department struggles as thousands exit and few replaced. This one is from
Without objection.
ProPublica, how Trump has exploited pardons and clemency to reward political allies and supporters. And finally, this one from the Cato Institute, ICE has diverted over 25,000 officers
Without
from their
objection.
jobs at the FBI. Okay.
You're next.
Yes.
Okay. I now recognize the ranking member, the ranking member of this committee, I do, Ms. Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. If we've learned anything this year is that congressional Republicans are more interested in serving Donald Trump than they are in serving their constituents. Over the past 10 months, they have given away permanent tax cuts to the wealthiest people on earth, demolished half of the White House, pardoned violent insurrectionists, significantly driven up cost of living across the country, and then given themselves a taxpayer-funded 8-week vacation, all so that they could delay as long as possible Congress voting to release the Epstein files. And now they're trying to gaslight you into believing that you should trust them on crime policy. They want you to believe that living in a police state is a good or normal thing. They want you to be okay with having armed soldiers and federal agents monitor you as you shop for groceries or take your children to school. They want you to think that you won't be affected, but we've already seen Americans detained, arrested, injured, and some nearly killed because of this administration's reckless approach to handling crime. And they're doing all of this without acknowledging the fact that Republican-led states are experiencing a murder and crime and violent crime crisis, and they have for the last 2 decades. The Republicans' murder state rates were 33% higher than Democratic state murder rates in both 21 and 2022. In fact, over the past 22 years, the Republican state murder rates were nearly a quarter higher compared to states that are led by Democrats. Even when you remove Democratic cities and counties from the Republican states' data, their murder rate is still nearly a quarter higher than states run by Democrats. Ms. Levine, how long have you studied crime?
You're going to have me show my age? Is that nice?
It doesn't show on your face, honey. That's all that matters.
Let's just say about 3 decades.
Okay, very good. So would you agree that factors like poverty, lax gun laws, and a lack of public services can lead to higher crime rates?
Yes, I agree with that.
According to the Census Bureau, states with the highest poverty rates are disproportionately Republican governed and often have laxer gun laws and less public services. Wouldn't you agree that these factors are likely why Republican-led states have higher murder rates than Democratic states?
I would. In fact, I would like to lift up some research from one of our faculty members, Dr. Robert Apel. He recently conducted a study looking at the relationship between levels and quality of public assistance and crime, and found that there is the relationship in the expected direction. That is, lower public assistance, more crime, more recidivism.
Thank you so much for that. So not only are you likely to be a victim of violent crime in a Republican-led state, you're now less likely to receive victim assistance because of Republicans cutting resources for food, shelter, and transportation. This is what Donald Trump's America looks like. Never let a wannabe tyrant convince you that the only way for you to be safe is to live under a police state where he controls your day-to-day activities by means of military or armed federal agents. That's what we call a dictatorship. And I just want to be clear, because I appreciate what you just brought up, because I did serve as a public defender and a court-appointed attorney. So as we sat here, I remembered that one of the witnesses' opening statements, they mentioned the word why. And as Michael Jackson used to sing, why? We have not dealt with the why. We have not dealt with why crime happens. And if you understand the why, then maybe you can come to a conclusion. But as someone who has sat there with people that were too poor to be able to afford their own attorneys, I can tell you some whys. But what I am going to do is talk to you about why the idea that incarceration is the only thing that can fix anything, and the fact that we have 2 witnesses that are telling us that we need to go back to the '94 crime bill when we learned that all that did was drive up incarceration. It didn't drive down addiction, because addiction is actually an illness, but that's a whole other issue. And you can't incarcerate your way out of an illness, just like you can't incarcerate somebody that has cancer and believe that somehow they now will be cured. But I digress. What I will tell you is that we also know that the U.S. has the highest incarceration rate of any independent democracy on earth. Worse, every single state incarcerates more people per capita than most nations. In the global context, even progressive U.S. states like New York and Massachusetts appear to be extreme, just like Louisiana and Mississippi. In addition to that, the United States has the highest incarceration rate, the highest average firearms per 100 people, highest homicides per 100,000 people, and the lowest safety and securing rate of 12 countries in comparison. I had a 17-year-old that was charged with stealing food out of the concession stand at his high school. Unfortunately, in the state of Texas, at the age of 17, you are considered an adult. So what did they do? They decided to charge him with burglary of a habitation. He had an attorney that was not me when he went through this. They put him on felony probation. Ultimately, they revoked his probation because he was too poor to show up to his actual probation officer, as his mom was the one who was required to take off work so that she could take him in. I'm gonna wrap up, but this is really important for people to understand. At the end of the day, they ended up giving my kid the maximum punishment for less than $20 worth of candy that he stole out of the concession stand. Ultimately, I told them that it was a mistake to send him to prison. When he went to prison, he learned how to be a criminal. That's where he learned how to cook meth. The next time that I saw him, it was because he had committed a real crime. Ultimately, all that did was harm our communities. And I will be clear, this was a poor young man, but he was not black. So, and this was in rural Texas.
Time is
this
expired.
was East Texas.
Time is
So I want to
expired.
be smart about what we do with crime, and I want to make sure that
time
we
is
are putting our
expired.
money in smart places. Thank you so much for being kind.
I thank the gentlewoman. With that, I recognize the former Attorney General and from the great state of Kansas, Robert Under. I'm sorry, it's mistaken. I'm sorry, Derek Schmidt. I got to get my people straight here, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're
I
promoting.
made you an attorney. I made a doctor an attorney general. I guess that makes you a doctor. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, just don't put me in Missouri and we'll be okay.
All right, okay.
That's all good.
That's a deal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for their time. It's been nearly 2 hours. I spent 12 years as what our law calls the chief law enforcement official of my state and got to work with a lot of prosecutions directly. We ran our victim support programs for the state, so we worked with a lot of crime victims. I've been sitting here over the course of this hearing and I've made a list of a few terms that in 12 years interacting with literally hundreds of crime victims and their families. In fact, this time of the year we always hosted around the holidays a series of holiday remembrance receptions for crime victims' families because we understand that the unique experience of going through the loss of a loved one or being victimized yourself, sometimes just being together with others at the holidays who have had a similar experience can be powerful. So hundreds. This is a list of terms I never heard once from any of them. I never heard the term Trump. I never heard the term Biden, and I served during the Biden years. I never heard the term Obama, and I served during the Obama years. I never heard the phrase unanimous consent. I never had one of them quote crime statistics or theory to me. I never heard one of them say Republican. I never heard one of them say Democrat. I heard a lot of them cry. I heard a lot of them tell me the stories about their loved one who was lost or about what happened to them. Some were police officers, ma'am. We lost, I believe it was 13 on my watch. It might have been 14. I'd have to go back and count name by name, but we've lost 4 police officers to homicide on duty this year in Kansas. I had 4 others shot by the grace of God, none are dead, just this last week in my district. So this is real. And I think it's sad that this conversation has gone off in many different directions, and I want to thank our witnesses for wanting to talk about what we can do about all of this. For me, the measure is how do we have fewer Kansans killed, raped, or robbed? That's what this ought to be about. So with that, I want to turn to the testimony from Mr. Mangual. You recommend a crime bill, and you give us 4 elements that you think ought to be in there, some of which, by the way, sound remarkably like, I heard Bill Clinton's voice in my head when you said 100,000 more cops on the street, hire and retain more police officers. You added a 5th one that wasn't in your written testimony. You said condition grants on best practices. I want to ask our other witnesses, just start with Mr. Mauro and go down the line. Do you think it's a good idea that we ought to look at some type of broad or comprehensive crime bill in this Congress? And if so, what else, or what would you put in it?
I do think it is a good idea. I worked once, and frankly, if we don't learn from history, as the saying goes, we're doomed to repeat it. And it may surprise the committee to hear me say that I agree with Ms. Crockett. Low-level offenses, if you incarcerate people, actually among the perps, among the perpetrators, they call prison school. And that goes back to the mafia. They go to prison, they're all in jail together, they have nothing but time, and that's how they learn to do other crimes and develop criminal schemes. So the point I was trying to make in my opening remarks, and I think it's where we should be looking at anything like a crime bill, is that if it's surgical, data-driven, and intelligent, if you have somebody who has committed, as I was saying earlier, the 327 perpetrators of the shoplifting I was talking about. They've committed over 9,000 at the last check shopliftings. That's not sending somebody to school. That's getting somebody off the streets, and it's going to continue to do it. That's why we lock up the toothpaste. So I would argue, and as I said, the sweet spot for me was in the 2014-2015 era there, where under a Democratic mayor and Democratic administration in New York, we drove down not only crime, but incarceration rates. That can be done if it's done intelligently. My hope had been that we could speak about that in a bipartisan way, because both sides have, in my opinion, good points to make. You don't want to lock everybody. You don't want to incarcerate your way out of these things. If it's done intelligently, surgically, you can make progress. We've done that before. So I don't think, to answer your question, we need to reinvent the wheel. We should just look at what worked in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Mauro. Ms. McKinney, do you have any thoughts on if there's anything in particular we ought to do that could be helpful?
As far as policing goes, I think that just the local leaders and also government leaders should definitely have a hard stance on crime and come forward and just denounce and stop being soft. Just, you know, this repeat offender stuff, telling the criminals that it's okay with what they can do and releasing them. Give them a 3 strikes and you're out. We used to have that in Memphis years ago, and it did deter crime. It showed the younger people that they were not allowed to go back out and do it again, that there would be consequences for what they were going to do. You know, a lot of the problems that we have in Memphis is through leadership. They are very neglectful in their duties. They don't prioritize education for the children. A lot of the children in Memphis don't know how to read. They don't know how to do basic math, and that's an issue. Parent accountability is an issue. Parents just let their kids run wild. You know, they don't know where their kids are at. I don't know what you can do about that. I don't agree with having, you know, parents be held accountable for their children's decisions in some instances, because parents can only do so much. The children do what they do because that was their choice.
The lady's time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman. That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before this subcommittee. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional writing in question form for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, this hearing is adjourned.